Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Podcana. I'm joined by Moyen once again to go over a Ruby Amethyst deck tech. This deck has been performing incredibly for us. Moyen has done very well with it on ladder. I also recently went undefeated with it in paper. Just an absolutely great expression of the Ruby Amethyst control list. Moyen, want to thank you for coming back on to the channel once again. How has what's your idea on the Ruby Amethyst deck right now? Do you think that this deck might be the actual best deck? Is it better than Steel Amber now that it feels like we've honed in the list a bit more?
I think so. I think the meta has been evolving since the last video, and Steel Amber has been getting a lot more popular. And I think Steel Amber has, while it has some better matchups like across the field, the purple-red control deck can still beat those matchups. Plus, it beats Steel Amber, so it's kind of hard to find a weakness in red purple.
Yeah, I think that one of the weaknesses traditionally is probably the aggressive deck. So Steel Amber is very, very good into aggressive decks, like extremely favorable. But I feel that Steel Amber has a tough matchup into the control list, and we've known that. But on the Pixelborn ladder in particular, I think we saw Ruby Amethyst become a bit less popular. You didn't run into it much on ladder, and Steel Amber is a much more efficient deck for gaining ranks if that is your goal. But ultimately, when it comes to deck power level, this list, and specifically the list we've built here, feels very strong all around. Feels like you have a lot of game into aggro, and your matchups are very favorable at that. But your matchup into Steel Amber is extremely favorable as this deck. Like Ruby Amethyst is very favored into Steel Amber. And then in terms of the mirror, I feel like the list that we have is just outperforming a lot of the other lists. And the mirror as well is very, very technical. So really comes down to player skill most of the time. Anyway, Moyen, let's get into the cards. Let's talk about some of the cards that we're playing. So just starting it off with the 3 Sergeant Tibbs. Do you find yourself playing out the Sergeant Tibbs when you draw it most of the time? Or is this mostly a card that you're inking?
I'm mostly ink it. It's just a reaction to opposing aggression to slow them down a little bit, because the long game against most matchups you're just winning most of the time.
And then the Magic Brooms, you're playing 3 of them. So Magic Broom, a card that specifically in the mirror, you can shuffle cards back into your deck, key threats. You can also loop the brooms to stop yourself from getting fatigued. Outside of that, is this a card that you're mostly inking in other matchups? And are there some use cases in terms of the into the mirror? What card do you find yourself putting back into your deck the most? Is it Be Prepared? Is it Aladdin? Is it Maleficent? What are you reshuffling with Magic Broom if it's not another Magic Broom?
The mirror is very technical, as you already said, so it kind of depends on game state. Game state, sometimes it's even, sometimes either you or your opponent is the aggressor in this matchup. So basically, one guy is trying to win with lore and drawing a little bit more aggressively, and the other guy is falling behind, so they will try to either swing back on lore, which can be hard to do, or just to run them out of cards in their deck and just try to survive. So based on that, you're just picking your cards. Let's say you're the aggressor, it could easily be that you shuffle an Ursula, an Elsa, or a Maleficent. Let's say you're just trying to survive, you're usually just shuffling another Be Prepared. And then that's with the first broom. With the second and third, if you were able not to ink them, so if you were able to ink other cards, then you are trying to shuffle more brooms so that you can go for a longer game plan.
All right, and on to the Gaston. Our playing 2. Gaston is a great card to answer opposing Simbas, and just as a strong 2-drop to help you sort of stabilize the board and go into the late game, which is where this deck mostly functions. Outside of that, Gaston is an inkable card, and you will probably be inking it a lot of the time. Contextual on board state, of course. After that, we have Maleficent Sorceress. Maleficent Sorceress, the 3-drop, the 2/2, in conjunction with Friends on the Other Side, the spell or the song that draws 2 cards, is a staple in this deck. All decks are going to be playing that. 4 of. The card comes down, it replaces itself. It can sing Friends on the Other Side, draw 2 more cards. Just one of the more powerful things you can be doing. And there's not a lot of opportunity costs you have to incur in order to play these cards, because they are inkable as well. When it comes to cards that you're adding to this deck and where the slots start to get tight and there's a lot of decisions to make in deck building, it actually is more around the non-inkable cards. Those are the most important slots. So the first one I want to talk about here is Rafiki. You're playing 4 of them, Moyen. Talk to me about why Rafiki is so powerful.
So basically, we're playing all the 3-drops that are best at gaining card advantage. Maleficent does it by replacing itself and drawing the card when you play it. Rafiki often does it by trading down against a 2-2 or a 2-3 that your opponent played early game, and then still getting another trade because it survives the first trade. So both of them are great at gaining card advantage. It's just Rafiki does it in a way that's also generating tempo for you at the cost of being uninkable.
Absolutely. Yeah, often being able to clear 2 threats, you can come down, clear something like a Simba, clear a 2-2 that's questing against you, and then trade again on your opponent, whether they trade in and kill your Rafiki or you're able to clear another 2-2 with it. You can get a lot of value out of this card, and Rush is just a very powerful mechanic in Lorcana, which is why Rafiki does have that uninkable aspect to the card. All right, talking about Jafar, playing 2 Jafars. Jafar, we talked about it prior to coming on and to this deck tech. It's probably the 59th, 60th card in the deck. But right now, what function do you see Jafar having in this deck?
So if we talk about Jafar, we basically also have to talk about Pongo, which is both of our 4-drop slots. Pongo is the preferred one. It's very good at questing and very, very hard to answer, but it's not that good at trading. So Jafar is filling that role as in games where we are being defensive and we can't afford to spend our turn 4 on just playing something to quest. Where we actually want something to trade, we are going to prefer to play the Jafar. Other than that, we are mostly inking the Jafar.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what you said in regards to the Pongo. Pongo is actually probably one of the better cards in the deck, and I think that it's a card that not a lot of people are playing. You see it in some shells, but it is definitely underplayed in our opinion. So Pongo fulfills a similar function that Goofy, the evasive Goofy that as a 3-4 stat line has, and also Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor, but Pongo does it at 4 resources. So Pongo exists in that 4-drop slot, which is a relatively open slot. If you look at the 5-drop slot, you have Maui there, which is a card that you're going to be playing 4 of. So we find that Pongo does the job that Goofy and Mickey Mouse do, but does it better and does it for cheaper. Pretty much the same thing. Your opponent, especially in the control mirror, will have to answer it immediately, and it can help you race, or at least get a lot of lore. I don't know if you'll be racing against the Steel Amber kind of decks, or even against the aggressive decks. It is a tough card for opposing decks to deal with. All right, going on to Maui here. I mean, Maui just kind of in the same vein as Rafiki, fulfilling a similar function, but at the 5-drop slot. Anything to say about the four of Maui's, or is it just one of the better cards you can be playing in Ruby at this point in Lorcana?
It does come down a little bit later, so it's not your anti-aggro protection, but it also very often 2-for-1s, plus it's inkable. The fact that this card's inkable is completely crazy. I think this is non-negotiable for.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you there. All right. This is the card of the deck, right? We have 4 Ursulas. Ursula Power Hungry 2/8. It's the one that make your opponent lose the lore and you draw a card. If they lose lore, that is an if condition, by the way. And it quests for 3. It's uninkable, costs 7. A lot of people, they either pick the Elsas or the Ursulas. We have 4 Ursulas and 3 Elsas. Talk to me about why Elsa is so powerful, and we both believe that this card is significantly underplayed. It is underappreciated.
This card's completely crazy. 1, because it already comes down at 7. 2, because it draws a card and it threatens so much lore with this high HP. It's like everything about this card's very strong. Also, something that maybe doesn't come to mind at first is that even if your opponent has a board, you can just play this. It has immediate -1 lore impact at least. It does recycle itself, and then what's your opponent going to do? The only thing they can do usually is just develop more board, while you have such strong plays into that. If they develop too much board, you can even sing Be Prepared with Ursula and then develop behind it, leaving them behind in tempo. Or if they don't develop enough, you can just play Elsa, quest with Ursula, and they can't even trade the Ursula because it's 8 HP. You're threatening 6 lore already on the next turn, even not considering that you could have a Pongo or something in play. So this card is a huge threat, and even if it gets single target removed, it still replaced itself on play.
It's so good. It really is so good. And it's my favorite card to play in the deck. Like, this is the card that I love hitting it. And like you talked about in that 7-drop slot, 7 drop just feels significantly different to me than the 8 drop. When I have to rely on an Elsa to swing the board, trying to get up to those 8 resources can be a bit tougher than on 7. And we've actually done the hypergeometric math to sort of optimize around the 7 drop as well with the 22 uninkables, which we can talk about that a little bit later. But Ursula, should be the biggest takeaway from this deck. Like this card is underplayed. This card is very, very powerful. It is good into most matchups, pretty much every matchup. It's fantastic. Aggro decks can't deal with it. Steel Amber literally can't do anything about it, pretty much. And in the control mirror, it's super strong.
Yeah. Also, I want to add to that it adds variety to the deck, as in usually if you wouldn't play Ursula, or if Ursula wouldn't exist, your opponent could just play around your board clear, the be prepared, and then you would sometimes still be forced to clear because you don't have a different play that's keeping you in the game. But this way, if they don't develop enough, you just play Ursula and they're in a really bad spot.
Yep, absolutely. All right, on to Aladdin. We play the big Aladdin. I think this is a decent time to talk about some of the cards we don't play. So particularly the 3-drop Elsa and the 3-drop Aladdin. People will often play these cards. The Elsa being the 2/3 that taps, and the Aladdin being the 2/2 that makes your opponent lose the lore. And they will shift into them. So they will shift Aladdin. They will shift into Elsa. I think that when people think about Ruby Amethyst control, they think about Shift Aladdin as being a powerful play. While that can be swinging on the board, I think you will most of the time only catch out lower skill opponents, because you can play around Shift Aladdin, and sometimes the threat of Shift Aladdin might be getting you enough value because your opponent will eat opportunity cost when trying to play around it. But ultimately, we opt to not play those cards because they're just not powerful enough. In terms of Aladdin, how critical is this card to the deck, and where do you find it being most useful? Can you sort of run through some play lines in the mirror particularly? Because that's where I really find, Aladdin is great against aggro, right? When it comes down turn 7, they basically can't quest anymore, where they have to deal with the Aladdin. But in the aggro matchup, in the control mirror, particularly when you get to the late game, we do see some critical play lines using Aladdin and the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, or once you get to deep in late game, one player playing Elsa, tapping 2 things down, and then playing Aladdin with White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, and effectively winning the game off sort of this big board swingy trade that costs a lot of resources.
So in the mirror, there's a lot of different spots depending on which player has which items down. Basically, if your opponent doesn't have the shield down, which is restanding one of their characters, then they're always on the threat of you playing Aladdin if you have Pocket Watch down and just washing it into anything. If you also have the shield down, you can rush into something and then restand it so your opponent can't rush into yours. So if you have the shield down, you also want to be playing around your opponent's Aladdins, because it's more in Lorcana in general, you can't have a lot of unexpected lore usually, but this or unexpected lore swings, but this basically swings the lore for 4 points without having anything on the board if you just rush your Aladdin into something. And this deck can even sometimes rush it into 2 different characters if you have both the shield and the Pocket Watch. So that's already -4 lore for them, +4 for you, and then at that point you can be so far ahead that they have to use their removal less efficiently because you have so much lore that they have to remove them earlier than they would usually like to, and then they're just in a really bad spot. So the strongest late game combo is, which comes up from time to time, but not all the time because it's very late. Even if they don't exert their characters, if you have 19 ink, you can Elsa to exert 2 of their characters for 8, then play Aladdin for 7, which is 15. Rush it in for 1 with the Pocket Watch, and then restand it with the shield for 3. So for 19, even just if they have 2 characters on the board that have 5 or less HP, even if they're not exerted, you can swing the lore for 8.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there's people listening to this that maybe haven't played a lot of Ruby Amethyst, and they're like, 19 lore, when is that going to happen? I will tell you that it happens. I wouldn't say it's infrequent, but particularly, I played it in paper recently. I've been playing a lot of ladder as well. But I won my match doing exactly that. The Aladdin and getting 4 lore and sort of surprise winning the game with Elsa. Like, it's sort of this... it's not really a combo, but I would call it an endgame win condition. Like, you need to be aware as you get into the ultra late game in the mirror that your opponent has access to that, and you need to be mitigating your potential threats on board. Like, you need to be mitigating your risks on board. So like playing a Maui in the ultra late game can be super dangerous, because if it does trade with something favorably, but then it's left on board, I mean, that's potentially Aladdin, swinging 2 lore out of nowhere with the Elsa. Anyway, in regards to the number of Elsas, anything you want to say on 3 versus 4 here?
You could definitely also have 4. I think Ursula is set at 4, while Elsa could be either 3, either 4. So having another one would help the mirror even more, but I'm already very confident with this list going into the mirror, and in most other matchups you are fine with 3.
Yep, and in regards to Maleficent, the 9-drop, as well as Dragonfire, anything to say about these cards, or do they just feel very standard in the list at this point?
They're basically
spot removal and 2 for 1.
Yeah, it's just so Maleficent goes 2 for 1, Dragonfire just goes 1 for 1. So Dragonfire I could see potentially cutting down if you have a good reason to, but it just makes it so that once you do stabilize the board, you're not dying to chip damage, because you have a lot of ways to answer characters that aren't exerted, as you have the Elsa, you can -1 them with Ursula, but also you can just spot removal with Dragonfire or Maleficent, or you can wipe the entire board with Be Prepared. So once you stabilize, let's say there's an aggro deck that's just top decking playing a threat a turn, you do have a lot of ways to still make it so that that character won't get to quest.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about Be Prepared. Be Prepared, maybe in contention for best card in the game. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you use the card, how aggressively you mulligan for it? Like, where do you find its use case just in general across matchups?
So for it is a very, very important card for this deck, because it means your opponent can never go all in against a red deck, or if they go all in, they know that they could instantly lose the game to Be Prepared. From playing this deck a lot, there's a couple things that I've learned on how to play Be Prepared. There's 2 different things I want to talk about. One is that there's times where Be Prepared will look like the best play in your hand, and it is for that turn, but you can actually make it even better by playing an Ursula or an Elsa into it, and your opponent is in this extremely weird spot where their only viable play would be to play more minions, and then they could get completely blown out by Be Prepared. And the other thing is, I think at the start I wasn't singing this card a lot. When I had an Ursula or Elsa on the board, I was trying maybe not to play it, but I think it can often be very viable to just sing this and neglect the 3 lore that you would usually make with Ursula or Elsa, and then just develop behind it, and your opponent can not really recover from that.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about all of the items. We have 2 Shield of Virtues, 2 Magic Mirror, 1 Ursula's Cauldron, and 2 White Rabbit's Pocket Watch.
So the numbers are basically based on how bad it is to draw multiple of these, but you still want to be drawing the first one pretty badly. So for example, a card like Magic Mirror, I could see maybe going up to 3 depending on what matchups you're facing. The second Cauldron really basically doesn't do anything, so I would really rather not play that. And then the others are inkable, and they're in all the matchups against semi-aggressive decks or aggressive decks, you don't really care about Shield or Pocket Watch. You can just ink both of them. In the mirror, you would try to at least not ink the second one, because having a shield can make you go for lore a lot, where you can't get punished by Aladdin, and having the Pocket Watch makes it so you can punish your opponent's exerted characters with your own Aladdin. So in the mirror, not inking one of these can be very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the mirror, for what variance can possibly exist in the mirror, because the mirror does feel quite low variance, it is somewhat hinged around getting those early items. Like, your opponent gets an early Cauldron, your opponent gets an early Magic Mirror, can be pretty rough. And, Moyen and I were actually talking before we hopped on here about how powerful an early Shield of Virtue can be, because it allows you, once you get up to, 3-4 lore, to kind of quest for free. And, pretty much every lore point matters, and it can make the end game very, very tough for your opponent if you're at that 15 plus lore, because you can get it quite quickly, and they have to answer pretty much every threat you put on the board immediately. Anyway, Moyen, I want to ask you a high level question here. So in the past 2-3 weeks, we saw Ruby Amethyst evolve and then sort of kind of fade a little bit out of the meta, and Steel Amber became a bit more popular. But before that happened, Ruby Amethyst went through a couple iterations, particularly with an increase in deck size. Initially, we saw an increase in deck size to 64 cards, then 67 cards. People playing, quite a lot of cards over 67 to actually try to get more equity in the mirror and tech for the mirror to avoid things like fatigue, and also to avoid things like fatigue against a whole new world decks. How do you feel about that? The 60 cards versus the 64 to 67 card decks?
I think so. Your deck isn't suddenly terrible just because you play a few more cards. It just means that you will decrease the likelihood of drawing your key cards. Like, be prepared. It's a key card against a lot of matchups. You will just draw it a little bit less. You will draw your 3 drops into friends on the other side in the early game a little bit less, which means you will generate less card advantage and then maybe lose to You Have Forgotten Me a little bit more often. So I'm not a fan of going higher, although it does help in the mirror like a slightly bit. But I don't think it's worth it because the mirror doesn't always... Or there's a decent amount of time the mirror doesn't actually go to someone decking out or someone being even close to decking out. It can easily end in someone just outvaluing the other guy. Or it can just end in someone getting so much lore early that their threats are too big and they have to use their removal inefficiently, and they will just fade out of the game at some point.
I agree with you, and that has been my experience in the mirror. I think that a lot of players I've played against, both on Pixelborn and in paper, have taken this sort of philosophy from 2 to 3 weeks ago of hyper focused on not decking out in the ultra late game, and I find that they overvalue maybe drawing cards or just trying to get more cards in hand, and then they ultimately just lose to cards like Pongo and just getting behind on lore, because this deck can get pretty aggressive when it comes to actually questing for lore. And I found that almost none of my matches actually go to decking. They don't really go to fatigue. It happens, but particularly with things like Magic Broom, you have equity against that. But ultimately, the mirror comes down to just card game fundamentals and outvaluing your opponent. If you outvalue your opponent more often than not, you will win drastically more games than you wouldn't otherwise. Which sounds simple, but honestly, that is like pretty much all of Lorcana. Lorcana is like an illusion of a card game, but it's ultimately just an exchange of value. And the more high value trades you get, the more you'll win. Anyway, I want to talk about some cards we're not playing. We already talked about
just one second, not just about the decking out. I think because a lot of people would then go, okay, I play more cards, I play 4 brooms, and maybe I play a few Mickey Mouse, and then I rush in my brooms, and I have even more brooms, and I never deck out. But just all these cards that you want to use for these combos, and then trying to follow this game plan of okay, my opponent decks out before me, usually hurts your value game plan and your tempo, and then your opponent might have a little bit more lore because you were holding back a few cards for these combos, and that might be the little bit of the edge that they need to get so close to 20 that you can't recover from that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's kind of a consistent fundamental of deck building that you want to play as few cards as you possibly can, kind of on the deck building constraints. Obviously, there's outlier stat, and there's reasons why you will go over occasionally. I don't think that the current thesis for playing 64, 67 cards is a good enough reason. I think you should be playing a 60s card Ruby Amethyst deck. I think that is a superior deck list to be playing right now in the current state of Lorcana. Just want to quickly go through some cards we're not playing, like very, very quickly.
Okay.
So no Elsa. We talked about why.
Yep.
Some people are playing Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer to help with the brooms. I feel like it's unnecessary. I assume you agree on that one, Moyen?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the 5-drop slot with the Queen in particular? This is a card we see in a lot of Ruby Amethyst decks.
Okay, so this somewhat comes down back to decking out, but it's completely different because going Queen. Oh, I don't know. There's so many cards, so many things wrong with this. If you play Queen on 5. What's your game plan with it? Again, in most matchups where against mid-range or aggressive, you kind of still have to trade. You can't afford to draw a card and then let them quest. But it's not good at trading. If you want to trade with a mid-game threat, you could just play Jafar, or you want to play Maui on 5, or you want to play Rafiki on 3. It doesn't help with that at all. So you could say, okay, but I just want to exert it, draw a card. I think that's too slow. So it doesn't really, and it also I don't think it really generates card advantage, because in the only matchup where you would be able to do that is kind of the mirror, and then the mirror this gets Maried, and then they have a 6/1, and all you did was play a 4/5, draw a card the next turn that got kind of 2-for-1.
Yep.
So
exactly.
It doesn't really achieve what you want to achieve.
All right, some players are playing Zeus God of Lightning, the 0/4 cost, uninkable with Rush, Challenger 4, Quest for 2. What are your thoughts on this card? This is a card that wasn't in the list originally, has started to make its way in. How do you feel about Zeus God of Lightning?
I like that it's a 4 cost, but that's about it. I think filling in a Russia in the 4 cost isn't the worst thing in the world, but comparing it to Rafiki or Maui is just very unfavorably, because while this takes the value trade, afterwards it just gets traded for free if your opponent has anything on the board. So it doesn't really 2-for-1. And I guess it quests for 2, so there's some reasoning why it would be okay, but in general I just think it's just too bad in comparison to Rafiki and Maui.
I think so, right? Because Maui comes down at 5. It's inkable, and Maui is just, I feel like much better than this card. Obviously, Maui can't quest, but this card is trying to do a lot of things. Like, Zeus God of Lightning is a rush challenger that is trying to come down and attack things, but then it's statted in a way, particularly in the uninkable aspect of it, that it's you're paying the price of it being able to quest for 2, but it's also not really a questing card. That's why it's so awkward. And Rafiki kind of does the job that Zeus would do, but it's a 3/3, and you're probably going to get the same kind of trades. Like, Rafiki is probably going to 2-for-1. Zeus God of Lightning, I don't even know if Zeus God of Lightning is going to 2-for-1, because it's going to attack something, take maybe really 1-2 damage, and then get hit. So
it value trades, then it's in the 0-2 in your opponent's turn. And yeah, you're also highlighting that it has Challenger +4, so you want to challenge, but it also has Quest +2. So it's just trying to do too many things, and it's not good at either of those things.
Yeah, just maybe kind of a bad card. I could be wrong about them, but all right. Befuddle is a card that we see in a lot of lists, Moyen. I don't know why. Like, I think there's way better 1-drops to be playing. What are your thoughts on Befuddle?
Comparing it to Hearthstone, it's like a zap, but with very little tempo gain. It's like you just return it but you return something that's basically the same cost as the card that you're playing. So there's no tempo gain, which means you're just losing card advantage on purpose. And you could say, okay, maybe it still helps against aggro returning a Simba than getting the trade. Yes, that can happen, but I don't think you want to be playing a terrible card just to help against Simba some of the time.
Yeah. I think that Befuddle it's a fine card if you're like, okay, I'm going to ink this card 90% of the time. But I think that there's better cards to fill that slot, and that's why we have things like the Sergeant Tibbs, and you can just play the 1-mana 2/2. It's just better. I think it's just a better thing to be doing. All right, heading over to Ruby. We talked about why we don't play Goofy, Daredevil, and why we don't play Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor. Both are evasive characters. Both are things that come down, quest, and demand answers from your opponent. While the Goofy can trade into the Pongo, we find that the 5-drop slot is congested, particularly because of Maui, and because of that, we prefer to play Pongo, even though it's a 2/3 in the 4-drop slot. It just goes better with the overall deck curve. Outside of that, I don't think there's any other cards that are sort of in contention in Ruby in particular. Everything else is pretty much standard. Anything you want to say, Moyen, before we close it out and go to the games here?
I think I'm good.
All right, and here we are into game 1. We're going to be on the draw, going second. What are you thinking about looking at this mulligan here?
Well, in general, on the mulligan, you want to be mulliganing very aggressively for ink. So a lot of the time, I'll keep a card that I'll actually never play just because it's ink. Unless my hand really needs a little bit more early game. But with this hand, with having 1-drop mirror already, I would just keep any ink. If any of these left cards were ink, no matter what cards they were, I would keep them.
Yep.
So the easiest way to lose with this deck is just drawing too many uninkables, so you need to mulligan around that.
Yeah, and I will put a link to an article written by Frank Karsten, a sort of Magic the Gathering mathematician guy who's been around for a long time, who did the hypergeometric calculation on uninkables in a deck like this. And you can actually see the math. We have like a 95% to get to 7 ink by turn 7 in this deck. But I think that the main way you lose games with this deck is you mulligan two, or you keep too many non-inkables in your mulligan hand, or you draw into them. That's like the most devastating thing.
I mean, people won't keep uninkables. I don't think that will be the downfall of this deck. I think what people will do is throw away too many inkables that are bad. Like, For example, I was in no game I would ever play my second tips, but I'm still keeping it. If I had a Maleficent, I would keep it just for ink with most hands. I think that's the important part to take away here. Also, if my opponent didn't play anything on 1, I probably wouldn't even have played the tips. I would just use all my tips as ink. But me playing this ink already denied them a lore, slowing them down. And with this hand, we could totally afford to use an ink on doing that.
Yes. I think that is a great fundamental for a lot of Lorcana. Like the Steel Amber list has the same thing with the Captain Hooks. Like sometimes it is correct to actually just not even play your 1-drop and to ink it so you can make sure you get to your higher curve, which is where your more powerful cards are. 1-drops in lists, less so in Steel Amber, particularly in Ruby Amethyst, they function as a way to posture on the board state and prevent your opponent from being able to gain 2 to 3 lore on you while you go to develop your 3-drop.
Also, I'm inking here because these traits are really bad for my opponent, and there's no card in Grey-Blue that really punishes this. If I was playing against Purple here, I wouldn't ink because of Rafiki, for example.
Mm-hmm. And what are you considering playing against Grey-Blue here? Are you thinking about a whole new world and looking to dump your hand as fast as possible?
In general, Grey-Blue is usually a lot of ramp and then whole new world, so I would like to get ahead in tempo instead of getting ahead in card advantage first, if I can do that. Still, I will not play Magic Boom over draw 2 here just because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a consideration to play around Whole New World. I don't... So basically now, do I ever need the Boom or do I ever need the second Jafar? I think I actually might... It's more likely I need the second Jafar, although I probably won't.
Yep, Jafar, definitely a more playable card against the Whole New World deck as well.
So when in some matchups, okay, not really with this hand, but in some matchups maybe you would need to draw early with the Magic Mirror just to generate card advantage, and this is the opposite matchup where you care about board a whole lot more than about drawing a card. Or in general against Grey, sometimes you also don't really want to play the Magic Mirror too early, but I think that's with this hand we are totally fine if we get beasted at any point.
Yeah.
So now I think the Maleficent is the worst card in this hand. Heavily doubt I'm ever going to use that. So this time we're actually going to develop the Jafar. So usually I like to threaten my opponent with Pongo if the board stays somewhat equal, but we are on the back foot, so we need something that is better at trading into our opponent's cards.
Yep, on the current board state, your opponent is the aggressor or is the beatdown.
The other consideration is I could take the value trade, considering that maybe my 2/2 still has value after this, my 2/1. It will mean that they get 1 extra quest for 3, or 1 extra lore for 3 though, for free. So depends. Also, it means if I get Tinkerbell or Grab Your Sword is not that likely, but if I get Tinkerbell, the 2/2 dies anyway, so I probably just take the safer trade into the Aurora.
Yeah. That would have been my instinct, would be to trade into this Aurora.
But these decisions seem very minor, but they're very consequential in a game of Lorcana, I think.
Absolutely. That's the funniest thing about this game, is it sort of lulls you in with these very simple rules and mechanics. There's a whole new world. But it's actually one of the most technically sort of punishing games I've ever played.
The Whole New World is really bad for us because Maui was by far the best card we could have, and we had it already in our hand, and we no longer have it, but we should be fine. So now the thing is, like, if we both have a lot of cards available to us, in theory we will be behind because they have more resources than us. So this was by far the best card that they could have there. Ooh, and they can remove the Jafar from the value trade.
And they... What do you think about them 2-for-1ing themselves like that? Do you think that they just have another whole new world in their hand here?
I think even if they don't, that's a totally fine play. If I get this value trade, they're giving me far too much time. They need to do this no matter whether they have whole new world or not. So we have 2 options immediately. Either just Dragonfire the Beast, or we take a value trade with Rafiki, leaving it on the board, and maybe even develop the Gaston to take another trade on the next turn.
Mm.
In general, this is another matchup, just like in the mirror, where you want to be playing cards that contest something, but for as little cost as possible. So Eladin is actually a pretty bad card in this matchup, unless you draw a Pocket Watch, because any card, the more expensive your card is without doing anything on play, the worse it is into Hades, and the more tempo they gain by playing 7 cost 3/6 Hades on your card. We want to minimize their questing until we wipe the board on turn 7. So in 2 turns.
Yeah.
Playing the Gaston could help us do that, but it also uses an ink.
I think my inclination would be to develop the gas on the Rafiki here.
Yeah, I think
but it's definitely very close between that and just dragon firing a. I just want to get some board presence.
Also, I think Pongo in this case has to be inked, because next turn it will be already a bad play, because it's like the turn before we get to be prepared. So I'm never really going to play that. So it doesn't minimize their questing potential. So I think the shield value.
They value trade our Rafiki with their beast. It's also good for us because we're concerned about them questing right now. Like they are getting too far.
It's totally fine if they take any trade. Interesting that they chose to ink Robin Hood. So it's a really good card to play here. It makes me a little bit worried of what's to come.
Yeah, it doesn't tell us anything about the potential of their hand. Oh, there's the Tinkerbell.
No, that was...
There we go.
Oh, okay. Oh, that makes sense, I guess. So they didn't need Robin Hood draw, because this is a little bit bigger, and they were going to Honeywell anyways. Okay. So now we're at least 3 resources behind already. Even more than that with the Fishborn Quell. And they discarded 1 Be Prepared. Which is public knowledge to them.
And we have 2 in hand. I mean, the removal becomes pretty critical once they get past that 10 lore and they start dropping the bells. You need to be able to answer them, especially if they get ahead on board. But because it looks like they're going to be close to 10 lore or above by the time we actually get to clear their board, which can be hard.
Yeah, they're very, very far ahead. Nothing that I can do really slows them down all too much, because we still don't have a Maui, or now not even a Dragonfire available to us. So we have 2 Dragonfires, 3 Maui left. The Rafiki probably needs to trade. Which means we cannot sing Friends on the other side. It would be nice to get the items down, but they also have 3 beasts left, as far as I know.
My inclination here would be to trade with the Rafiki, develop the items, and, you know, we're obviously playing towards a whole new world on the 7 resource clear, 7 ink clear.
Yeah, I think I'm inking the Pocket Watch then. I guess we can Cauldron look first. In this case, it probably has to be Maui, but I'm not sure. Ursula could be a very nice follow-up as well. I think I'm taking Ursula. I'll explain why in a bit. So basically, I think post the Be Prepared, it's the better follow-up, and if we're going to be prepared next turn anyways, and then they play a threat, the Maui doesn't help us clear the threat because it's not exerted yet. So it's a little late for the Maui. Only really helps like post. I guess if I go Be Prepared and then next turn then I Elsa, and then there's a threat on the board that I still need to clear. I think right now our most likely chance maybe back in this game would be to Be Prepared and then If they don't develop enough to threaten lethal, then we go Ursula. Then Ursula sings Be Prepared and we develop behind it, something like that. Or if they develop too much, maybe double Be Prepared gets us there if they don't have the third whole new world.
Very nice that we get a bell as well on this turn 7 that they invested into it on our Be Prepared turn.
Let's look into the Cauldron. Now it's getting tough. Do we need... I think we might need
the inkable card is the question. It depends if you're inking front of the other side or if you're playing it. I don't know how we'll have time to play it unless we're singing it with Ursula.
Yeah, either way, no matter which one of these I'm inking, I might still have to ink the other card if I don't pick that. Maleficent is a little slow. If they can develop multiple threats still.
I think
I'm questing this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, also, it's hard for me to see us playing the Maleficent, but I mean, he could answer a bell. So it's a critical card in this matchup, to be honest. And we have Magic Mirror to draw if we get into like a sort of a slower board state as well.
Yeah, plus the Cauldron. So even if they have a beast, we might have a card that makes it so we don't run out of value still. So we did fall quite far behind early game. They had exactly what the deck wants to do. They ramped up and played 2 whole new worlds. And we weren't really able to swing back the board with Maoris. Or did we have we had one Rafiki, right? Did we?
Yes, we had one Rafiki.
But at this is a lead that favors them, but this is a lead that this control deck can definitely come back from still. But
yeah,
the third whole new world could be difficult.
It could be bad. It could be bad. Do you find that the blue-gray matchup is generally favorable for Ruby Amethyst? Because it's probably... I know that you and I have different experiences on ladder. Like, I don't face a lot of Sapphire decks, blue decks on ladder. How do you find the matchup is in general for Ruby Amethyst?
I think it's completely fine. If they do exactly what the deck wants to do, and then sometimes they draw enough of the Hades, they kind of run away with tempo, and then you don't have enough board wipes to reset if they're already that ahead. But in general, I do think the matchup's quite favored for Purple Red.
I'm really interested. I know the Robin Hood is just a good play for them there, but considering they inked the Robin Hood last time they had a whole new world, I wonder if it gives us any information they may not have the third in their hand because they actually played it out this time. It could just be the best play.
Yeah, I think they could. It's also totally reasonable that they would wait a turn. Also, singing whole new world. So not. At this point, I guess they don't need to. Because even if they pay 5 for it, they still have a lot of resources to develop behind it.
I'm interested for your play this turn, actually.
Me too. So Ursula would be the play that sets up Be Prepared. The better follow-up after singing Be Prepared would be another Ursula. These are like kind of reactive cards behind it. So the other play is just to Elsa them, and then
that was my line. So you Elsa this turn, then you trade Elsa Robin Hood on the following turn, and you play Maleficent if they drop another big drop, ideally because you've seen you're going to draw the inkable card in the pocket watch. So that's like a very nice 2-turn.
I think this is I think if we had 2 Ursulas, I would go Ursula into Sing Be Prepared Ursula, and if I missed, I would also go for it. If we missed on ink of the Cauldron, but I think with having ink next turn, I think we go Elsa into Maleficent. Or with this being the plan, we can still totally deviate from this. If they go very wide, we could still just sing Be Prepared into Ursula. It's also completely fine. There's the Hades, which means even if we wanted to, we couldn't sing. But we can still just wipe this board and then still have the Maleficent afterwards. Let's see what the Cauldron says. Cauldron says another Maleficent.
That's good.
I think we have to clear this for sure.
Yep.
I guess the reason I should ink this is because I could get a whole new world. They could draw a whole new world off the top of the deck.
Yep. I think that's a solid logic there. These Maleficents will be nice in case they end up dropping the bells here, top deck them.
Yeah. I think we're getting rewarded for keeping Maleficent over the 3-cost Maleficent. Oh no, what? No, it was a draw 2 card.
We also did ink the 3-drop Maleficent when there was an option to potentially ink the 9-drop, which we still have in our hand, I think. Or did we deck it a whole new world away? I can't remember.
Yeah, it got a whole new world, but it's still good that we didn't ink Maleficent over this one. Okay, so with them only developing 1 quest if they shapeshift 2 quests, Ursula's the better draw, in my opinion. I'm trying to cauldron for like a low value ink so that I can fit in the magic mirror draw potentially. I think I'm taking Pongo because I see more value in. I guess if it ever gets to that stage, maybe Pongo is the better card. It doesn't really matter.
Hard to say. I wonder if you just ink. Yeah.
I think this one.
Just inking the draw.
Yeah, I always ink it. So I was just thinking, if the game goes that long, do I ever? Which card is better if I get whole new worlded now? And I think it's Maui, so that's why I took Pongo. Okay, very good spotlight for why Ursula is good.
Yeah, I mean, their best answer to this Ursula. So, like, the thing is, the blue deck actually does have answers to Ursula, where a lot of decks don't. I mean, obviously, the Ruby deck does, the deck that we're playing, in the form of Dragonfire, Maleficent, but, you know, the blue deck or the Sapphire deck also has access to Hades, but you talk about Steel decks, Amber decks, Steel Amber decks in particular, that combination, they just cannot do anything against Ursula. It is absolutely insane. The one thing you need to keep in mind, I think, whenever you play against gold decks or Amber decks, whatever you want to call them, is you need to be careful of Rapunzel. I mean, particularly in the mirror, which we didn't discuss too much on the last deck we did, but not allowing your opponent to get value out of the Rapunzel is probably the easiest way to win the matchup against them.
Yeah. Okay, so we only have 1 Be Prepared left. We would be very good here. This doesn't have a trade, and the 3 quest isn't all that crazy right now. So I'm contemplating just singing Fence on the Other Side with this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
The only downside is I can't sing Be Prepared, but I think I'm fine with that. Okay. So playing Aladdin is very, very potent. But it dies to Let It Go, and it dies to Hades. Is Let It Go the name of the 5 cost?
Yes, it is. The 5 cost that puts in your inkwell.
Yeah, so there's like 7 outs, which is a lot. The other line is just to Magic Boom, probably a Be Prepared, and then Maleficent a Beast. Then I think
that the Aladdin is more risky if they have it, right? But you would ask yourself the question: would they use it on Ursula? Are they going to need a top deck it here? I think Aladdin is very risky. I feel like if we play Aladdin and we get Let It Go, or we get Hades, even worse, and we don't drop Be Prepared, I think we lose that game.
Okay, but so this is like an EV question because Maleficent is less variance, but the spot might be so bad that it's high EV to actually take the risk. So if we Maleficent, they go down to 4 quests that turn, so they go up to 15. We have Maleficent and Boom on the board, and Ursula. We have another Maleficent maybe coming down the turn after. While they're at 15, 3 cards, maybe 2 more creatures on the board. Is that good enough? So if one of these gets Let It Go, are we still not able to trade enough?
I was thinking about Maleficent and then developing the Aladdin behind it if we can, just to get the body on, because if they do just quest, then ideally we can trade.
I was taking a long time to talk through that, so I had to play fast with the timer.
Yeah, it's definitely a critical play. to how this match will ultimately resolve.
Mm-hmm. So basically, I ended up deciding, okay, I do think the spot is good enough that I don't have to take the risk. So now do I quest something? Shield lets us get an extra trade of Maleficent next turn, maybe. We could just Maleficent Shield, restand something. I don't think I'm inking anything here.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think shield is actually quite good if our opponent is planning to just quest at our face.
There was also the line where I just ink Aladdin, play the shield this turn, and then have the shield down already, and then I even represent Dragon restand. So there was some options there, but I do think that this was better. So we can even if they don't a whole new world, we can just get outvalued still.
Definitely.
So now we have 2 Be Prepareds in the deck. 16 cards. They are on 15 cards. I don't think this game will end in decking out because they're just threatening too much for us to survive this long. But they have 1 more Be Prepared. If they do draw a little bit more, maybe it could end up like that. Okay, they are going all in basically.
Yep, definitely.
Which is probably a solid choice. If they don't, we might just not even have to draw the.
Yeah. Are we playing Maui plus Dragonfire here, and then trading on the board where we can?
So Maui, Dragonfire. It does trade everything but 2 still.
Maybe the Maui is not necessary. It only gets rid of the Tinkerbell, actually. That's the only difference.
So instead I could also go Ursula.
Yes.
Fire that. Ursula
plus Dragonfire.
This. Then they have 5 quests on the board at 12. Every little point that we are denying could definitely end up mattering.
I don't think that the Maui Dragonfire is better than Ursula because Maui's only denying the Tinkerbell, which will likely only get them 1 more lore anyway, and Ursula gets that and replaces itself on board. So
yeah, but we also don't have the -1 option hand, and maybe they can shapeshift the Tinkerbell. They've only used 2.
Yeah, that's scary.
I do think it's probably Ursula as well. It's just playing Devil's Advocate. Also, it gets us closer to a pocket watch that we need.
Yep, you can also find Be Prepared off of it.
We haven't used one, have we? I don't know. I don't remember whether we inked one. We inked one.
We inked one, okay. I believe. Yes. Okay.
I was thinking, is there any reason, like, is Tinkerbell enough of a reason to actually trade with 3
to
instead
double
of
trade? Yeah. I was wondering if you were considering to play around Shift Tink in order to double trade into the Tinkerbell instead of the Simba.
I don't care about the Tinkerbell shifting that much. The only thing I care more about Tinkerbell not killing something, so I was only really contemplating Ursula trading instead of the Brew.
Makes sense.
Aurora. After we used, I think, a lot of Dragonfires. Not really used them, they're mostly discarded, but we're at 1 Dragonfire left. Dragonfire can be very important because otherwise your Elsa doesn't really work very well against Aurora boards. Your Maleficent doesn't work that well. Maybe Maleficent for Fiki can be good still. Yeah, it's just Pocket Watch is the most important card at this point. It's good for tempo and good for keeping them a little bit lower on their lore.
Yeah, I honestly hope that they don't have Tinkerbell here. Oh, Grab Your Swords does, I guess, somewhat similar. I was kind of hoping they wouldn't clear Maleficent.
Yeah, it's like, oh, but they... it would be expensive for them to sing it, but they just had 13 resources. You can just play it for 5.
Yeah, Pocket Watch would be a top deck.
I think we have to leave up Aurora. I guess we could also leave up Woman Hood as well. Just we have to leave up something is the issue. I think letting them get to 19 is so bad that I might even take a 2 and 13 draw for one of the 2B prepareds. And even if I miss, I can still triple Rafiki and not die on board. Is that true? Bam bam bam, yeah, that is true. Yeah, I think that's the plan. Yeah, unlucky. Go bam. I guess we just play Maui Rafiki. Keep 2 Rafikis. Little cleaner. Now do we play? I guess they showed us that they didn't have Tinkerbell, maybe? We have a
Yeah,
little bit of a read on that.
No, they don't have it. They would have to top deck it because they would play Tinkerbell instead of Grabber Swords. It would literally clear the same thing.
Yeah, but maybe they would want to hold back a threat with us having to be prepared. But it's not really the way they've been playing. So I think we really take the value trades. So we lose to Eye of the Fate, versus some of these versions won, but doesn't really look like they are running it, with them never discarding or playing it.
Yeah. At this phase, I think it would have to be L1 of.
Also, our decision where we needed an ink and we used the Pongo and put kept the Maui in deck, it does actually matter. It's I mean, having a Maui here was a lot different than having a Pongo. Okay, they go to 19. We have...
No, Eye of the Fates.
We have 1 Ursula left. How much?
Pocket Watch would, once again.
Yeah, the Pocket Watch is the big one.
Is it even good enough with Aladdin?
Well, now it's also double Aurora, so I can't... Okay, I guess I can kill one. And then we go Dragonfire Maleficent, but then we have to use the Aladdin. Wait, but that aren't we just setting up... Wait, are we setting up lethal? Probably are. Just third... I mean, this is already setting up lethal. So we go... Yeah, that's... Wait, we're even clearing the... Okay, that's pretty good. So we have this trade. Then we single target remove Aurora, so we can single target remove the other guy.
Yep.
Does that not work?
Oh no, I think this is the bug. Try it with Maleficent.
Okay.
Okay, you're good. Okay. Yeah, there was a bug in like 1.5 or 1.4 with that exact thing with the Aurora, double Aurora, and it would stick around.
That scared me for a second.
Yeah. Somebody told me at locals actually, and I was like, I've never encountered that bug. But
so the thing is, we have plus 10, but the better thing is, even if they play one Grab Your Sword, we still have plus 8. There's 2 Grab Your Swords left. If they had both, they would clear, but then they would still need to develop behind it to threaten us. Otherwise, we just develop a board again. I would say a lot of things went wrong for us this game. Especially with us never getting to draw any of the last 2B prepareds.
Yeah, I think that every decision that we made actually ended up mattering. Which is... Okay, whole new world.
What?
How many cards do they have in deck?
They don't have resources left, do they? They don't. They're at 4, we are at 4. Because they played all 4 whole new worlds, never discarding another one. Oh, if they Hades the Ursula, they would be alive here.
Yeah, but
it's crazy.
Wow. Okay, they missed lethal, or they missed avoiding lethal. Wow, that was a good game.
Yeah, it was perfect for Spotlight.